Hey drivers, we've got just a few days to clean up this 1915 to see if we can make it run, throw it in Dweezil, and get back on the road. Let's get started. I was told this engine was a great runner before it was pulled, and it sat for a long time. During that time, dirt daubers got into it, and they make little nests out of, well, dirt. Not good for an engine. So it needs to be fully disassembled, completely cleaned up. I think I want to take a bunch of measurements while I'm in there and inspect bearings, that kind of a thing. Hopefully all of that goes well. We're able to put it back together largely as is, get it running, and throw it into the car. I've given it a bit of a once over, noticed a few things. Obviously it needs to be cleaned, that's the project, but we'll want to put new pushrod tubes. These are a little bit rusty and I'm too afraid of leaks. Obviously missing some parts too, so we'll need a distributor, we'll need a fan shroud, cylinder tins, the deflector tins down here, the pulley tin, and a firewall tin. It does have the one piece of tin that's usually missing, sometimes referred to as the Hoover bit, but we'll need the other two parts for the doghouse tin. Nice to see that it has a clutch on it. Hopefully that clutch is good. It's got a set of Weber 40s on it, and I think these are the for realsies Webers, so that's really cool. There you go. So if you can make that out, a 40 IDF. The rebuild kits are on the way. This linkage, it's nice that it's there, but I did go ahead and order something that might be a little bit nicer than this, the CSP bell crank linkage, so we'll get to play around with that. I am totally uninitiated on dual carbs. I've always been a keep it simple, relatively stock person with the exception of reliability mods, and I think I'm still that way, but how do you know what you want unless you try stuff, right? So I'm happy to try these out, but no expert advice coming from here on how to deal with these things. Totally a noob with dual carbs. At least I think I've got the good ones to work with, and I'm really thankful for that. We'll leave the safety and comfort of a center-mounted carb to try out this dual carb thing on this engine. Somebody should have already got it set up for me, so I'm hoping that my job is pretty easy here. I did notice something pretty weird. This is an AK case from about 1973, and it's got 8mm studs with case savers. Very desirable, that's great. But look over here. On the top left stud of the number 3 cylinder, it's a 10mm stud. I don't know if that's a self-tapping or what, but that's weird. See, the 10mm and the 8mm have different torque values. Of course, the 10mm studs being from earlier cases and not as desirable as the 8mm studs. The other thing that's really interesting to me is which one it is. This is usually the deep stud, and I think on this later case this would have been deep studded, where the case saver or the threads, whatever form they took, are deeper in the case where there's a little bit more meat to hold that cylinder stud in place without cracking or stripping or whatever. I wonder what we might find behind this. Is there an 8mm case saver hidden underneath this 10mm stud, or did something awful happen and this was their fix to go with mismatched head studs? Not sure on this one, but that's the first big mystery that has popped up. Pretty typical. We see some broken off tin screws here on this head. The other side looks good, so happy about that. The exhaust ports on these cylinder heads seem a little bigger. They seem really smooth, so these heads may be kind of nice. I don't know anything about the internals other than it is said to be a 1915. That's a 69mm crank, like stock stroke, with 94mm pistons, the big ones. I don't know if any of those parts are upgraded, particularly the crank. I have no idea what cam is in it. We're gonna have to discover all of that stuff as we take the thing apart. It could be a bone stock OEM crank in there. That's of course 69 millimeters, or it could be something a little nicer and counterweighted. That would be great to find. You'd expect that they hopped up the cam a little bit, and if so, how much, right? Are we going to find an Engel 110 in there? Is it any good? Are the rods upgraded at all? Don't know. Big mysteries here, right? All we know is that it had a good reputation when it was a runner some time ago, and we'll see how that was achieved once we take this thing apart. What I don't see is a ton of oil all over everything. That would be a bad sign. Now there is some. There's a little bit of oil leaking out here, so that could be a rear main seal or the cam plug leaking. Neither of those being a huge deal, as long as it's not a crack back there. That 10 millimeter stud we found, I hope there's nothing related going on in here. The bottom of the heads look pretty clean, which is great. I did find a little bit of oil here, which I don't really like, but it's not a ton. As far as choices that were made and what it might tell us, they did go with upgraded heads and have these fancy valve covers on it. They did not upgrade the push rod tubes, which I'm fine with. I actually prefer these. It's not a super neat hot rod crank pulley. It's not full flowed, which I would kind of like it to be. The oil plugs have not been pulled. I think that would be a good idea for us. This may be a larger oil pump. You can see we're barely hanging on to the studs here. Kind of an aftermarket oil filler. We'll probably put something a little more stock there. And a typical fuel pump that you find on VW engines. This is just what you can get these days. So I kind of see a salt of the earth high performance engine here. Not top dollar, cost was no object. And I'm okay with that. But it still leaves a pretty big question mark about what's going on inside. Are they really upgraded parts and strong internals, or are they just what you need to get 15 cubic centimeters of displacement? Let's take it apart and see. These carbs are going to be their own project since I'm new to them, so I'll really take my time to go through these and learn about them and get the rebuild done. That kit is on the way and hopefully will be here before too long. Looking down into the intake ports, you can see it is important that we're going to clean this because there's a lot of crud down there. And there has been some work done. Those are definitely large. You can see a lot of the valve guide. Things have been smoothed out. So hopefully it was competent work. That's the thing with an engine teardown, is you go into it with all these hopes, but you're really just waiting to find the thing that blows it all apart and makes it into a totally different beast. We'll see. Here's why we're doing this right here. This is the remains of some kind of a flying insect. Maybe a dirt dauber, I don't know. I think they're normally bigger than this. But it was all the way down here, and it wouldn't take much for it to get further down. The full cleaning is warranted here. I did find something really scary in the oil filler. Down in here we see some casting flash. That's all that it took to knock that off. And that's a piece of aluminum that could easily go down into the engine. It's the thing with aftermarket stuff, is you really need to go over it. Like this needs deburring. It needs, all that casting flash needs to be removed so that if it breaks off, it's not going to go down into your engine and clog your oil passages and screw up your bearings. Like, it's just not good fit and finish. Here's another look at it from the other end. You can see all that casting flash hanging out there, just waiting to drop off and down into the engine. Gotta check all that stuff. You can't trust the build quality of most aftermarket stuff. We will probably use a different fuel pump, but not a terrible idea to take a look at how many gaskets they used. And here, like to set the pressure, right? The fuel pressure. Here I only see the one. I don't know, maybe the fuel pressure was great, but a lot of times I think these are a little high. So what I was expecting to see were a few gaskets stacked up here, and I only found the one. Of course, these push rods go with the different style pumps. One for alternators, one for generators. Of course, I always forget which is which. I usually have a very difficult time pulling these out, but it looks like somebody made sure that that wasn't the case. This is pretty well ground down, so that made it a sure thing that it wouldn't get stuck. However, I'm not sure what that does for oiling. I'm not finding really any wavy washers on this engine. I'm sure there's some somewhere, but a lot of this is just the nut. None of them are loose. That's kind of why you'd expect you need those wavy washers, but I think it'll have wavy washers on it when it goes back together. Here's one. No leaks. That's amazingly clean. Sometimes we get information in this area or over here about any line boring that might have been done on the case. These look perfect. These look like they haven't been used at all. I don't see anything. Of course, you know, that could mean that it's never been bored. The engine does rotate freely, so that's a good sign. I see stock rocker arms. Single springs. These are not stock spring retainers, so aftermarket stuff there. So nothing crazy. No surprises, good or bad, I don't think. That might be a bit loose. Very loose. Much the same over here. I have one adjuster that's pretty boogered. So not sure what the story is with the retainers. Why, out of all the things to have aftermarket, are we seeing those? So this is a nice thing to find. These aren't bone stock heads. These are CB Performance heads. I don't know anything past that. Here it says 11-8, so I'm not sure what that means either. These are just some 041 CB Performance modified heads. We'll find out more as we go. I'm going through to check the valve lash. This is just one of the things that might paint a picture for me of what kind of life this engine lived before it was run for the last time. Was it cared for? Was it run loose? Who knows, right? So what I found, here it is, on this intake, it's very loose. This is 8 thousandths. I don't have a 4 thousandths feeler gauge. It's missing or something. This 5 thousandths squeezes in place. So I think we're down at 4 thousandths for this exhaust valve, which is a little tight. We like the exhaust to be 0.006 inches, and a lot of us like the intakes to be 0.006 inches. Neither of these are terrible, but neither of these are correct. I'll turn the engine a half turn and do the next one, number 4, and go from there. But I'm going to document all of this, so when I'm looking at seats and things, right, if there's a seat that looks like it's getting pounded into the head, and that corresponds with a tight measurement on the valves, now I've got some depth to the measurements. To me, numbers are useless by themselves. It's the story that they tell. So we're trying to piece it together. What kind of life has this engine had all the way up to the point that it was last run? And how was it treated? And how was it handling what was being asked of it? And so on. We're going to get to paint more of that, the more dimensions that our numbers give us. This one was pretty loose. The exhaust on number 3 here was at 0.013, so more than double the valve lash we'd like to see. So, okay, no biggie, just mental note. Something funny was up there. Maybe unrelated to anything. We'll pull the rockers off and retorque the head, see where we are. We're seeing a lot of stock stuff in the head, including the push rods. I hope that this indicates we don't have a radical cam. There's nothing here that says real strength in the top end, and that's fine. I'm perfectly okay with that. But if we have a radical cam pushing against all of this stuff, we might have been lucky to make it this far. So probably a mild cam. And that's probably what I'd choose for myself, so I'm okay with that. Same issue here. Just normal wear on some adjusters. So we'll put that on our list of parts. We don't want to put those back in. The tips of the valves feel good. I'm encouraged by this. That one I think we can clean up a little bit with a file just to remove the burr. The rest of these are in good shape. Something may have gotten hot. That's kind of odd. If this got unusually hot, it might burn more oil to it to look like that. So that's the intake on number 1. In play is right at 6 thousandths, right under. That's very good. We can set it tighter than that, but this is a used engine, so it's going to have some wear, and that wear is not beyond the spec. Very good. That means the internals have a chance. So does the thrust cut, has a chance. That's a good sign. I have a clean oil pan. I'm going to dump the oil and then we'll see if there's any flakes in it. I want a clean analysis of the oil that comes out of this thing. We have some 6mm bolts down here. Looks like 4 of them. That seems like a good way to wear out the threads in the case. Well, this one's kind of tight too, so we'll see what comes of this. Yeah, that's not my first choice for the oil plate. A little sludgy, and I do feel a little bit of grit in there. Good bit of aluminum. I'm starting to get the feeling that this engine is low miles. It may have gone a long time without an oil change, but all in all, it may be relatively low miles. Uh-oh. Little piece of bearing material, maybe from a rod bearing. Something stuck in there. That's a bad sign. I think we might have a hardware store washer down here. It's jammed in there. Okay, we're about to learn some stuff here. And the big reveal is big intake valves. Cool. I am really curious about this 10mm stud, and it's already loose, so let's pull it out and see what's going on inside there. Appears to be coming out clean. And there's a case saver. There's a 10mm case saver. Same thing on this side. No obvious cracks. This is something, they may call that semi-hemi or something, I don't know. I'll have to look that one up. But yeah, big intake valves. I think these are stock exhaust valves. You can kind of still see a crosshatch in this one. That's cool. So my theory about a relatively low mileage motor may be holding up. These 94 millimeter cylinders, they are paper thin. So I've never really been too sure about them, but I've got a set now, so we'll see what we can do with it. A preliminary cleaning of the cylinder heads have netted us all of these dirt dauber nests. Now that's all on the outside in the cooling fins. Pretty good pile of sediment here. It'll be interesting to see if we find any of this inside the engine. Took a peek inside. We'll pull it apart and really get to see everything, but I see stock rods. Not terribly surprising. It looks like that's what we're working with for connecting rods. Pulled the clutch off and we have an 8-dowel flywheel, which probably means we have an aftermarket crank, hopefully a counterweighted crank. Could be a stock crank that had been 8-doweled. There's jigs for that. The heads have larger intake valves and stock exhaust valves. I'm thinking this is 39 by 32. I don't see any cracks, which is wonderful. So still holding out hope that the thing cleans up nice. If I find a whole bunch of high value stuff inside, which I don't expect to, but if I did, then it's going to be really tough to figure out what to do with these pistons and cylinders. I think they have enough wear on them that they should be replaced if we were doing this all proper like. That's another 300 bucks and it's not really in the cards. We'll see how that goes. We have a clear bench. All of the parts we've removed have been cleaned up a little bit. So I think we're ready to start the short block. I did go in and refresh these marks here that already existed, just showing the number of the cylinders, right? 3 slashes for number 3. Go ahead and pull these off. There is a shim for setting compression, so we'll clean this up and keep it with the project for sure. Little bit of scratches here. Maybe a lot of side clearance on those rings. We'll check that. Gonna be really careful because I would like to reuse these even if they're halfway gone. Okay, that doesn't feel bad. They're actually pretty clean, or this one is anyway. So here's a bit of a surprise. These are 92 millimeter pistons. 94 would be where my thumb is, and our 92s are down here. So, okay, that means we're looking at an 1835. It's not a 1915. I don't really care about that, but it does explain how thin these cylinder walls are. It's an issue that I'm quite aware of, but have little experience with. And when I first saw these, I thought, wow, 94s are thin. Actually, I think 94s are a touch thicker than this. So we have a little less displacement and some really thin wall pistons and cylinders. That's going to make me think a little bit. We're going to see what the insides look like, and if it's high value stuff, we may reconsider using these or finding something else. Let's get them off and cleaned up. Ooh. That's not good. That's piston. It looks like a ring, but that is part of the piston. Well, that kind of decides it on this piston and cylinder set. Well, this is a bummer. Now we don't have a 1915 or an 1835. I don't know how long it ran like this. But there it is. Broken piston. This one looks different than the other one. This one has this area around the edge. Really no idea why, but it has that. This is a different piston. This one says NPR Dieno. This one does not say anything like that. So we have kind of a mixed matched piston and cylinder set here. Well, that's a bit of a bummer. As they say, have a good plan and stay flexible. So hopefully we can still get something figured out for this engine. But that does not at all look like our original plan at this point. This complicates things a little bit. We have the amazing shrinking engine. We thought we had a 1915, then it turned out we had cylinders that were an 1835. This is all assuming that we have a stock stroke in there, which I think is a safe assumption at this point. What I have is an old set of 90.5, so we're down to a 1776 at this point. But they're a little bit thicker wall, and they may just work. They're actually in better shape than the 92s that came off this engine. The thing that concerns me is it's a little bit of a sloppy fit. Not bad, but I would want to look this up and see what's permissible here. Also, this is less likely to be a slap it back together deal because we do have a step here from the 92s that needs to be fly cut off. You know, we could have put the same cylinders right back on and kind of held our noses, but that's not going to seal well. That's just going to be a disaster. So we'll have to figure out how to fly cut this, and that means things are getting way more involved looking at it that way. So not sure about that, but you know, here's kind of a distant option. We're not really going to know what we have to work with until we get it fully torn down, measured, and can determine which parts are usable and which parts need to be replaced, and if there's any machine work or anything that we're really trying to avoid here. How do we want to handle all of that? No real warning signs on the rods, so happy about that. Yeah, every one of them are stock, so they're the same. That's good. All right, let's do a few more things before we split the case. This is a pulley bender upper, but you'll only find it in the catalogs listed as a pulley puller. Not sure why they call it that. It's better at other things. Oh, cool. Well, today it's a puller. A little bit of scoring here. Just 26mm gears, so not a big pump. So we have a stock oil pump. It seems to be in decent shape, so we'll consider reusing it. We're getting a peek at the camshaft. The cam gear says Sig Urson cams. I've never heard of them before, but it pops up on a search. So this will be interesting. Won't know what the actual cam is until we take it out, I think. Unless it's here. Let's see. Yeah, so an Urson, looks like H1V1. I don't know what all those numbers mean, but we'll look it up. Urson H1V1 BCA73, who knows? Let's look it up. Not able to find any information on this cam. Maybe there's another number on it somewhere. So we'll go ahead and split the case and take a closer look. The gland nut has a pretty big ding in it here, which is kind of weird. I've seen people use chisels to tighten and loosen these, which not advisable. But I don't know what caused that because it's right on the corner. But I need to clean that off so I can get the socket over it. That's spec at 30. Moved at around 35, 40. That's not terrible. We've seen these just gorilla tight, which probably is not good for it. Just tight enough. Our little project here is troubled. The heads can be worked with. I don't mind stock rockers, that's fine. A busted piston pretty much rules out the whole set. That's bad. The cam is coming apart, and this is not the steel that you want to have floating around in your engine. This is really hard stuff. So now that it's coming off, there's these extremely hard bits of metal circulating throughout the engine and doing stuff like this. I don't know if this crank can be polished to within usability. I'm tempted. I mean, if we were being real about this, forget it. It needs to be ground, but we're playing with fire here just to see if we can get something running. So we may play with that, but we need to see the whole thing. That's 1 out of 8 surfaces that we need to inspect. We have a small problem here. Our thrust is just barely loose. I don't know if it's coming through on camera, but I am moving the bearing back and forth just a little bit, and I can feel it. So we need a thrust cut and an oversized bearing. We can deal with that. A little more involved than we wanted to get on this, but we can do it to keep the project alive. But we are piston and cylinderless, and we are camless. Haven't found anything destroyed about the case, and the jury is still out on this crankshaft. Let's get that pulled out, clean things up, take some measurements, see where we are. Then we'll kind of know what we have to work with and try and save the project from there. I think that's an example of a lifter that's worn out. It's dished. The case does not appear to be too pounded out, so that's definitely a positive thing. Made a quick comparison of the number 2 main bearing. This one came out of the left half, this came out of the right. You see the difference? I'll tell you that this is a lot heavier than this. So these are mismatched bearings. This is an all aluminum or Babbitt or whatever. This one I would imagine is steel backed. They wore a little bit differently too. Looks like there's more embedded in this one. Crazy. Mismatched number 2 main. We have the case parting line all cleaned up, so we're going to bolt the case together and take some measurements of the main bearing bores. That'll give us an idea on if we have something usable here or if it needs machine work. We'll be checking the number 2 main web to see if there's any light shining through it. So this is just one of our checks to see if we have a usable case or not. I am having some trouble getting this dowel pin out. So I keep putting some Croil on it and putting the vice grips to it. Hasn't popped out yet. I have the flashlight under the top of the number 2 main bearing web. I see nothing coming through. That's good. And here the flashlight is underneath the bottom of the number 2 main bearing web, and nothing coming through. So the case is not pounded out. It didn't look like it, but good to make sure. Little bit of good news, the crankshaft looks to be in good shape. The rods feel good. That's about how you'd want it to be. A little concerned about the number 2 main, but might be able to polish that out and use it. The mains and the rods are 20 under, which is no big deal to me. So I think we have something workable here. No machining required. That's kind of what we've been looking for. And this is where we run into a big roadblock. I did the measurements on the case. It is just barely oversized. It's not in terrible shape. Like, the holes are round. They're not pounded, but it's about -1/1000th of an inch bearing crush. It's just not going to hold the bearings in like we want it to. And so, with a case that could be great, I don't think we want to set it up for failure like that. So I'm going to put this one on the shelf with a note that says it needs its first oversize and a first thrust cut, really just a cleanup cut with a modified bearing. It does have this weirdness here. It has a little character, but it's just not right for what we're trying to accomplish now. We have the boring bar, but I hit a little bit of a spot where I want to do more work on it. I need a better way of measuring the cutters than the thing that I cobbled together. So I'm going to work on that, and then I'll feel more confident with cutting viable cases like this. So this one's going to have to wait until we sort out the issues we have with the boring bar. And once that's done, a whole world of possibilities comes alive. We did end up with some really cool parts here, a pair of Webers, some interesting heads that are going to be a lot of fun to play with. All of this has been bored out for the larger cylinders, so it's not good for a stock build anymore, and that's okay. We'll package this, put it on the shelf, and have a neat project in the future. We could go all the way to 2054 with some 94mm pistons and cylinders. They make some that'll slip into the holes that we already have in the case, and then we just have to bore out the heads a little bit more. And that'd be a fun engine. I like the idea of some small Webers on a 2054. Don't really care if I run out of air at high RPMs, because I'm not big on high RPMs anyway. We could do it pretty inexpensively. I have a 74mm crank already. Would just need to put about $360 or so into the pistons and cylinders that fit this hole, and then a further bored out set of heads, which I think we could do that. Bummer this one didn't work out for us this time. It's going to be a lot of fun in the future. Until then, we do have a case here that is ready to go as far as the main bores are concerned. So we're going to do some more checks on this one. Maybe do a really humble build with this early case. Really just trying to salvage the small amount of time that I have left to come up with a running engine. That's really the goal here. We used the crankshaft and the early case with a cheapy stock cam and some single port heads. They needed fly cutting and new guides, but after a little cleanup, they looked good. We did the usual oiling mods to the case, put it all together, and made a wish. We installed the engine while it cooled down from cam break-in, took a quick drive to seat the rings, and headed off to Bug Jam. That's keeping the project alive and driving the dream. We'll see you next time.